Father starved and locked. In Cage, the shocking truth of elder abuse. Welcome to Stories TH, where we explore the untold stories of real-life issues. In today's video, we uncover a chilling tale of elder abuse, where a son and daughter-in-law lock and starve an elderly father. This tragic story will make you question the limits of family loyalty. Watch until the end, and if this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories TH. In the small town, Mr. Stephen was once a figure of respect and admiration. A hard-working man, he had built a fortune from the ground up, making him a symbol of success. For decades, he had been the pillar of his family, providing for his wife and children, teaching them the value of hard work and dedication. He had always believed that no matter the struggles life threw at him, as long as his family remained together, they would overcome anything. But the years, as they tend to do, had brought change. His beloved wife passed away, leaving him with nothing but memories of better days. In the twilight of his life, Mr. Stephen made a decision that he believed would bring him peace. He would hand over the reins of his wealth and assets to his only son, Jason, and enjoy his later years surrounded by his children and grandchildren. "I've worked my whole life," he said to Jason, his voice tired but filled with hope. "Now, it's time for me to rest." Jason, standing by his side, accepted the power of attorney with a smile that seemed genuine at first glance. His wife, Lucy, stood beside him, holding his hand with a warmth that made Mr. Stephen feel reassured. "Don't worry, Dad," Lucy said softly, her voice full of feigned compassion. "You won't have to think about anything anymore." At first, Mr. Stephen couldn't sense anything wrong. He believed that the future was in good hands, that Jason would take care of him the way he had always promised. Little did he know, the promises were empty, and the love he thought he had from his son was slowly turning to ashes. As the days passed, the first signs of Jason's true nature began to show. The financial support that Mr. Stephen had always received started to dwindle. Jason, in the name of managing finances, reduced his father's monthly allowance, justifying it with hollow excuses. At first, Mr. Stephen tried not to question it, but deep down, the changes began to weigh on him. He had always been a man of dignity, used to a certain level of comfort, and now, as he was aging, he felt the sting of losing even that. One morning, after a quiet breakfast, Jason told him, "Dad, there's no need for you to carry cash anymore. Gracie will handle things from now on." Mr. Stephen frowned, but said nothing. He wasn't sure what was happening, but the unease in his chest was undeniable. Jason's coldness didn't stop there. Soon, the spacious room on the second floor, where Mr. Stephen had spent most of his life, was taken from him. "Dad," Jason said, "this room is too big for you. You don't need all this space anymore. It'll be more convenient for you to move to the room downstairs." When Mr. Stephen saw the new room, a dark, damp, and windowless space, it felt like a prison cell, a cage where he had been forgotten. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. How had it come to this? He had given his life for his family, and now it seemed like he was being discarded as if he were nothing more than a burden. Matthew, his 12-year-old grandson, was the only one who still showed him any kindness. Matthew would sneak into the house, ignoring the cold stares of his parents, just to sit with his grandfather, listen to his stories, and offer him comfort. But this did not go unnoticed. Lucy, furious at the attention Matthew was giving to Mr. Stephen, ordered him to stay away. "Don't waste your time with that old man," she snapped at him. "He's just a useless, old burden." The words stung Matthew to the core. He couldn't understand why his parents were being so cruel. Why were they treating his grandfather this way? One afternoon, when Mr. Stephen asked Jason for some money to buy medicine, Jason coldly replied, "What medicine? I'll get it for you, but don't think you can spend money like you used to." The words cut deeper than Mr. Stephen could have imagined. This wasn't just about money. It was about the loss of respect, the loss of dignity. He was no longer a father to Jason. He was just a forgotten relic of the past, something to be tucked away and ignored. The abuse escalated when Jason, with Lucy's approval, decided to lock Mr. Stephen outside in a metal cage. "You'll have plenty of time to think about everything you've done," Jason said, his voice devoid of any empathy. Mr. Stephen, helpless and frail, was thrown into the cage, and the door was locked behind him. The cold, biting winds of winter pierced through his thin clothes as he sat huddled in the cage, shivering from hunger and exhaustion. He couldn't believe what had happened to him. How had it come to this? His own son, the man he had raised with love and care, had turned on him in such a cruel, heartless way. Matthew, despite being forbidden from seeing his grandfather, couldn't sit idly by. He knew what was happening to Mr. Stephen was wrong, and he couldn't let it continue. One night, Matthew snuck out of the house, determined to help. He couldn't do it alone, though. He needed help. He went to Mr. James, a longtime friend of Mr. Stephen, and pleaded for his assistance. "Please," Matthew cried, "if we don't do something, Grandpa will die." Mr. James, although afraid of Jason's power, could see the desperation in Matthew's eyes. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "We can't let this continue." Matthew and Mr. James then turned to other neighbors, including Mr. Gabriel, a friend of Mr. Stephen's. They were all horrified by what they learned and agreed to take action. The group devised a plan to approach Mayor Harris, the only one with the authority to force the police to act. But they needed proof, solid, undeniable proof. Matthew risked everything to get the evidence. He sneaked into Jason's office, found Jason's phone, and managed to retrieve a video recording that showed Jason and Lucy's cruelty toward Mr. Stephen. The video was damning. It was the proof they needed to bring the authorities into the situation. Matthew sent the video to Mr. James and Mr. Gabriel, knowing that the time for action had finally come. The next morning, the police arrived at the mansion. Jason and Lucy, caught off guard, tried to brush it off, but the evidence was irrefutable. The police immediately moved to arrest them for elder abuse and child abuse. The trial was quick, and the town was in an uproar. People who had once been afraid of Jason's wealth and influence now saw the truth. Mr. Stephen, despite his frailty, had been vindicated. Matthew, the boy who had been beaten and disregarded, stood tall in front of the court, speaking the truth about what had happened. "I couldn't just let them do this to my grandfather," he said, his voice filled with determination. "He didn't deserve this." In the end, justice was served. Jason and Lucy were convicted and sentenced to prison. They lost everything: their wealth, their reputation, their power. But Mr. Stephen, though broken by the years of abuse, finally found peace, knowing that Matthew had saved him. The bond between grandfather and grandson had never been stronger. As Mr. Stephen recovered, the town rallied around him and Matthew, offering support. They were no longer alone. Matthew had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and love could prevail. And for the first time in a long time, Mr. Stephen could smile, knowing that his grandson was there to protect him, just as he had always hoped. Mr. Stephen had been a proud man for most of his life. Once a successful businessman, he had built his fortune from the ground up, working tirelessly to create a legacy for his family. He had sacrificed everything for his wife and children, and as the years passed, he hoped to finally enjoy a peaceful retirement surrounded by the love of his family. But, as is so often the case, life had different plans. After his wife passed away, Mr. Stephen made what he believed was the right decision: to transfer his wealth and the management of his assets to his only son, Jason. He hoped that his son would take care of him in his final years, ensuring that his legacy would continue. "I've worked my whole life," Mr. Stephen said to Jason. "Now, it's time for me to rest." Jason, who had always seemed dutiful and respectful, accepted the power of attorney and promised his father that he would take care of everything. Lucy, Jason's wife, was by his side, and the two of them assured Mr. Stephen that his life would be easier now that they were in charge. But the smile Jason wore hid his true intentions, and Lucy, ever the opportunist, had no interest in caring for an aging man. At first, the changes were subtle. Mr. Stephen's monthly allowance was gradually reduced. Jason explained that it was just to manage expenses, but it felt wrong to Mr. Stephen. His morning coffee outings with friends, which he had always enjoyed, were now restricted. "Dad," Jason said, "there's no need for you to carry cash around anymore. Gracie, the maid, will take care of everything." Mr. Stephen frowned, feeling the sting of the first betrayal. He had worked for this money, built it from the ground up, and now his son was taking it from him under the guise of helping him. Soon, Jason's changes became more apparent. The The spacious room on the second floor that Mr. Stephen had once occupied was taken from him and replaced with a small, dark room on the ground floor. "It's more convenient for you, Dad," Jason explained. "You only need a bed and a wardrobe, and this room will do." The room was cold and damp, with no windows. It felt like a prison. Mr. Stephen couldn't help but wonder how his life had come to this. His son had always been the one he trusted most, and now he felt like an outsider in his own home. The only person who still seemed to care about Mr. Stephen was his 12-year-old grandson, Matthew. Matthew would often sneak into the house to visit him, offering comfort and companionship when no one else would. But Jason and Lucy noticed Matthew's affection for his grandfather and disapproved. One day, Lucy caught Matthew trying to sneak into the yard to see Mr. Stephen. She grabbed his wrist and hissed, "Don't go near him again, do you understand?" Matthew was confused. "But Mom, Grandpa hasn't done anything wrong," he protested. Lucy's eyes narrowed with disdain. "He's just a useless old man. Focus on your studies. Don't waste time on him." Despite his parents' cruelty, Matthew still tried to show kindness to his grandfather. One evening, Mr. Stephen asked Jason for money to buy medicine, but Jason responded coldly, "What medicine? I'll buy it for you, but you can't spend money like you used to." That was the breaking point for Mr. Stephen. He had always trusted his son to take care of him, but now Jason's true nature was laid bare. Mr. Stephen realized that he had become a burden to his own flesh and blood, the son he had spent his life raising and loving. Then, one day, Jason and Lucy took things too far. They locked Mr. Stephen outside in a metal cage, leaving him in the freezing cold, hungry, and alone. "You need to think about all the foolish things you've done," Jason mocked. Mr. Stephen, shivering and frail, was thrown into the cage. The door was locked behind him, and he was left to suffer in the bitter winter cold. As the wind howled around him, Mr. Stephen felt like his entire world was collapsing. His own son, the person he had trusted more than anyone, had betrayed him in the most brutal way possible. It was a feeling that was hard to describe, despair mixed with shock, a sense of abandonment that cut deep into his soul. Matthew, desperate to save his grandfather, went to Mr. James, an old friend of Mr. Stephen's, and begged him for help. "Please help Grandpa," Matthew cried. "If we don't do something, he'll die." Mr. James, though hesitant, agreed to help, but they knew they couldn't take on Jason alone. They turned to the other neighbors for help, but fear held them back. Jason was powerful, his wealth and influence making him untouchable. Still, they couldn't let Mr. Stephen suffer any longer, so they devised a plan to bring attention to the situation. Matthew, knowing that time was running out, snuck into Jason's office one night and found a video on his father's phone. It was a recording of Jason and Lucy mocking Mr. Stephen while he was locked in the cage, weakened and abandoned. This video would be their proof, undeniable evidence of the abuse Mr. Stephen had suffered. Matthew sent the video to Mr. James and the other neighbors, knowing that the time had finally come to act. The next morning, the police arrived at Jason's mansion. They had received a tip about the elder abuse happening inside. Jason, caught off guard, tried to brush it off, but the evidence was overwhelming. The police broke down the cage and rescued Mr. Stephen. He was weak, malnourished, and traumatized, but he was alive. The neighbors, who had once been too afraid to act, now gathered to witness the truth. Jason and Lucy were arrested, their power stripped away. The trial that followed was quick, and Jason and Lucy were sentenced to prison for their crimes. Justice had been served. For the first time in months, Mr. Stephen felt relief. He had been saved, and his grandson Matthew had been the one to bring about his redemption. Matthew had risked everything to help his grandfather, and in doing so, he had proven that no matter how small you are, courage can change the course of a life. As Mr. Stephen recovered, the town rallied around him and Matthew, offering support and ensuring that they were never alone again. The love between grandfather and grandson was unbreakable, and the pain of the past slowly faded as they rebuilt their lives. This story serves as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, love and courage can triumph over cruelty and betrayal. It shows that, even when faced with insurmountable odds, standing up for what is right can change the world. And most importantly, it reminds us that family isn't just about blood, it's about love, loyalty, and the courage to protect those we care about. Mr. Stephen had spent decades of his life working tirelessly to build his wealth from the ground up, cementing his reputation as a successful businessman in his town. After his wife's passing, he felt it was time to pass on the torch to his only son, Jason. He had worked hard for this moment, and now all he wanted was to relax and enjoy his later years surrounded by his family, particularly his grandchildren. "Oh, I've worked my whole life for this. Now it's time for me to rest," he said, handing over the power of attorney to Jason. His son, with a fake smile, agreed, along with his wife Lucy, who promised to take care of him as he aged. At first, everything seemed to be fine. Jason promised to look after his father's well-being, but it wasn't long before his true intentions began to show. Mr. Stephen noticed small changes. At first, his monthly allowance began to shrink, and his son started controlling his finances, slowly reducing the funds available to him. Jason even hired a maid, Gracie, to take care of the house, under the guise of cost-cutting. "Dad, there's no need for you to have a personal servant anymore," Jason claimed, as if his father's decades of hard work meant nothing. Lucy's attitude changed too. She no longer tried to hide her disdain for him. One afternoon, when Mr. Stephen was reading, Lucy scolded him for leaving books around the house. "This house isn't a library," she snapped, making him feel unwelcome in his own home. But the true cruelty began when Jason decided to move his father out of his spacious second-floor room and into a small, dark room on the ground floor. The room, previously used for storage, had no windows, and the air in it was thick with dampness. "You only need a bed and a wardrobe," Jason said, as if this was perfectly acceptable. Mr. Stephen felt trapped, like a prisoner in his own house, but he said nothing. He couldn't bring himself to argue, not with his own son. The only person who still seemed to care about Mr. Stephen was his grandson, Matthew. The 12-year-old boy would often sneak into his grandfather's room, whispering comforting words and expressing concern. "Grandpa, are you sad?" Matthew asked one day, his eyes filled with worry. Mr. Stephen tried to put on a brave face, reassuring his grandson that he was fine, but Matthew wasn't fooled. He knew something wasn't right. Lucy, noticing the growing bond between Matthew and his grandfather, forbade him from spending time with Mr. Stephen. "From now on, you're not allowed to go near him. Do you understand?" she scolded Matthew. The boy, shocked by his mother's words, questioned her. "But Grandpa didn't do anything wrong," he protested. His mother slapped him hard across the face, telling him to focus on his studies and not waste time on a useless old man. Days turned into weeks, and the treatment grew worse. Mr. Stephen, once a proud man, found himself becoming a shadow in his own home. One night, he asked Jason for money to buy his medicine, but his son coldly replied, "What medicine do you need? Tell me, and I'll buy it for you, but you can't spend money like before." The words stung. The man who had worked so hard, who had given his son everything, was now being treated as an inconvenience, a burden. The cruelty reached its peak when Jason and Lucy decided to lock Mr. Stephen in a cage. Jason had an iron cage set up in the yard, a metal cage that was once used for their German shepherd. Mr. Stephen's heart sank as he watched his own son and daughter-in-law push him into the cage, locking it shut. The freezing rain that poured that night only added to his torment. The cage felt like a prison, one that stripped him of his dignity and reduced him to nothing more than a forgotten old man. His body was frail, and the cold seeped into his bones, but the emotional pain was even worse. He had spent his life providing for his family, and now he was being treated with such cruelty. Gracie, the maid who had been silently watching the situation unfold, couldn't take it anymore. She knew what was happening was wrong, but she felt powerless to intervene. One day, she secretly brought Mr. Stephen a small tray of food, but before she could give it to him, Lucy saw her. "What do you think you're doing?" Lucy hissed. Gracie stammered, apologizing, but Lucy slapped her across the face, threatening to fire her if she ever helped Mr. Stephen again. Matthew, seeing his grandfather's suffering, couldn't remain silent anymore. Late one night, he snuck out of his room and went to the cage where Mr. Stephen was locked. "Grandpa, I won't let them do this to you anymore," he whispered, trying to comfort his grandfather. But just as he was about to feed Mr. Stephen, Lucy caught him. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, slapping Matthew across the face. Jason came out to see what was happening, scolding Matthew for disobeying. He grabbed his son and threw him into the cage with his grandfather, locking them both inside. The next morning, Mr. Stevens' condition worsened. He had been left outside in the cage for days, deprived of food, water, and warmth. Gracie, who could no longer stand by, rushed to check on him. Her heart broke at the sight of him lying motionless in the cage. She ran inside, begging Jason to do something, but Jason was indifferent. "If he dies, it's better," he said coldly, not even caring about the man who had once been his father. But the cruelty would not go unnoticed. Mr. Stevens' longtime friend, Mr. James, noticed the signs of abuse and reported the situation. The neighbors, who had previously been too afraid of Jason's power to speak out, began to gossip, sharing their concerns about the old man's condition. When the police arrived, Matthew, weak but determined, pointed them to the cage. "He's in there," he said, tears streaming down his face. The police broke open the cage, finding Mr. Stephen malnourished and barely alive. Jason and Lucy, caught off guard by the investigation, tried to deny the accusations. But it was too late. The video Matthew had secretly recorded of Jason's earlier threats and mistreatment of his grandfather surfaced. Jason and Lucy were arrested, and the community rallied behind Mr. Stephen and Matthew, supporting them as they rebuilt their lives. In the end, justice was served. Jason and Lucy were sentenced to prison for their crimes, while Mr. Stephen, though weakened, began to heal. His strength came not from his wealth, but from the love and courage of his grandson. As they started their new life together, Matthew, no longer a frightened child, promised his grandfather that he would always protect him, no matter what. Mr. Stephen had built an empire from scratch, working tirelessly through the years to accumulate wealth and establish his reputation as a respected businessman in his town. Now, in his later years, he had made the decision to pass the torch to his only son, Jason. After his wife passed away, Mr. Stephen envisioned a peaceful retirement, surrounded by his family, especially his grandchildren. He trusted Jason completely, believing that his son would honor the legacy of hard work, compassion, and family unity that he had spent his life building. "I've worked all my life. Now it's time for me to rest," he said, signing over the power of attorney to Jason. Jason smiled, promising to take care of him in his old age, as did his wife Lucy. At first, everything appeared to be fine. The family dynamics seemed warm and respectful, but soon Jason's true nature began to emerge. Mr. Stephen noticed small but significant changes. His monthly allowance began to dwindle, and Jason started making decisions that slowly isolated him from the family he had built. Jason claimed he was just being practical, citing financial constraints. He even hired a maid, Gracie, to take care of the house, dismissing the need for Mr. Stephen to have a personal servant. "Dad, Gracie can handle everything now. You don't need someone to serve you," Jason said dismissively. Lucy, once the picture of sweetness, now treated Mr. Stephen with a cold indifference, as if his presence in their home had become an inconvenience. One day, while Mr. Stephen was peacefully reading, Lucy barged in, glaring at him. "Can you stop leaving books everywhere? This house isn't a library," she snapped, making Mr. Stephen feel unwelcome in his own home for the first time in his life. The breaking point came when Jason decided to move Mr. Stephen from his spacious second-floor bedroom to a small, dimly lit room on the ground floor. "This room is fine for you, Dad. It's more convenient," Jason said as he made the arrangements. The room, previously used for storage, had no windows and was damp with a stale odor. Mr. Stephen's heart sank as he realized what was happening. His son, whom he had trusted so fully, was now treating him like a burden. But Mr. Stephen kept quiet, swallowing his feelings, unable to understand how things had gone so wrong. The only source of comfort came from his 12-year-old grandson, Matthew. The boy would sneak into Mr. Stephen's room whenever he could, asking, "Grandpa, are you sad?" His eyes were filled with genuine concern. Mr. Stephen, in an attempt to reassure the boy, would force a weak smile, saying, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'm fine." But Matthew, perceptive for his age, knew something wasn't right. He could see the changes in his parents' behavior, and he could sense the growing tension in the house. The warmth and respect that had once filled the home were replaced by coldness and resentment. Soon, even Matthew's innocent bond with his grandfather became a problem for Jason and Lucy. "From now on, you're not allowed to go near Grandpa," Lucy scolded her son one day. Matthew, confused and hurt, asked, "But why? Grandpa didn't do anything wrong." His mother slapped him across the face, telling him to focus on his studies and stop wasting time on the useless old man. Matthew retreated to his room, tears streaming down his face. He could not understand how his parents, the people who were supposed to protect him and show him love, could treat his grandfather like this. The situation continued to escalate. Jason's behavior became more hostile, and one day when Mr. Stephen asked for money to buy his medicine, Jason refused. "What medicine do you need? If you need something, just tell me. But you can't spend money like before," Jason coldly replied. His father, the man who had worked his entire life to provide for him, was now being treated with such contempt. But Mr. Stephen didn't argue. He had no energy to fight back. The emotional toll was far worse than any physical discomfort. Things took a horrifying turn when Jason and Lucy decided to lock Mr. Stephen in a cage in the backyard. The cage, once used for their German Shepherd, was now repurposed to imprison Mr. Stephen. Jason and Lucy showed no remorse. They locked the door, leaving Mr. Stephen exposed to the elements, the rain chilling him to the bone. The once proud man, who had provided for his family and cared for them, was now reduced to a frail old man, shivering and helpless in the cold. Gracie the maid couldn't stand by and watch any longer. Though she was afraid of Jason and Lucy's power, she knew what was happening was wrong. One day, she secretly brought Mr. Stephen a tray of food, but Lucy caught her. "What do you think you're doing?" Lucy demanded, and when Gracie tried to explain, Lucy slapped her across the face and threatened to fire her. Gracie could do nothing but watch as the life she once knew turned into a nightmare. Matthew, devastated by the suffering of his grandfather, knew he had to do something. He could no longer sit idly by. That night, after Jason and Lucy went to bed, Matthew snuck out of his room, crossed the backyard, and approached the cage. "Grandpa, I won't let them do this to you anymore," he whispered. But just as he tried to feed Mr. Stephen, Lucy caught him and slapped him across the face. Jason dragged him inside, warning him that if he ever did that again, he would suffer the consequences. As Mr. Stephen's condition worsened, Matthew could see that time was running out. Desperate, he reached out to Mr. James, an old friend of Mr. Stephen's, and Mr. Gabriel, a neighbor who had always been kind. Together, they decided to take action. They knew they couldn't report the abuse to the local authorities. It would never reach the right people. But they knew one person who could help, Mayor Harris. The mayor had the power to force the police to take action. Matthew, determined to save his grandfather, managed to sneak into Jason's office and steal a video from his father's phone. The video showed Jason callously speaking about his father's imminent death. It was undeniable proof of the abuse, and Matthew knew it was their only hope. He sent the video to Mr. James and Mr. Gabriel, who immediately took it to the mayor. The mayor wasted no time, and the police arrived the next morning, catching Jason and Lucy red-handed. They were arrested for elder abuse, child abuse, and the exploitation of Mr. Stephen's assets. Jason and Lucy's empire came crashing down. They were stripped of their power, their wealth, and their dignity. Meanwhile, Mr. Stephen, though frail and weak, began to recover. His community rallied behind him, and he and Matthew moved into a new home, surrounded by love and care. They were no longer alone. The family that Jason had tried to destroy was now stronger than ever. Justice had been served. Mr. Stephen had worked tirelessly for his wealth, building a thriving business from the ground up. He had invested decades of hard work into his career, and after the death of his beloved wife, he thought the time had finally come to enjoy his later years in peace. His only son, Jason, had taken over the management of his father's assets, and Mr. Stephen was hopeful that he would spend his retirement surrounded by his family, especially his grandchildren. But as the days passed, the reality of his son's intentions became shockingly clear. Initially, everything seemed fine. Jason had promised to take care of his father, and his wife, Lucy, pretended to be the doting daughter-in-law. But the atmosphere soon began to shift. At first, it was small things. Jason gradually reduced his father's monthly allowance and started questioning the need for extra spending. But But soon, the changes became more severe. Jason, with Lucy's encouragement, moved Mr. Stephen from his spacious, comfortable room on the second floor into a tiny, damp room on the ground floor. "It's more convenient," Jason claimed, as he swept his father's personal belongings into a dark, windowless space that was previously used for storage. Mr. Stephen was heartbroken, but he said nothing. This was his son, after all, the man he had trusted with everything. But trust was quickly betrayed. Jason even went so far as to hire a new maid, Gracie, under the guise of cutting costs. "Dad, you don't need a personal servant anymore. Gracie can handle everything," Jason coldly stated, while Mr. Stephen watched helplessly. Gracie, a middle-aged woman with a kind heart, noticed the cruel treatment immediately. But as much as she wanted to help, she dared not oppose Jason. She could see the tension growing in the household, but she also knew who held the power. As the months wore on, Jason's cruelty became undeniable. The once warm home now felt like a prison for Mr. Stephen. One afternoon, while reading in the living room, Mr. Stephen was confronted by Lucy, who snapped at him for leaving books around. "Can you stop leaving books everywhere? This house isn't a library," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. This was the first time Mr. Stephen realized how isolated he had become in his own home. The final betrayal came when Jason locked him in a metal cage in the backyard. The cage, which had once been used for their family dog, was now repurposed as a prison for Mr. Stephen. It was a cold, cruel gesture, and for the first time, Mr. Stephen realized that he was no longer welcome in the family he had spent a lifetime building. The harsh reality of being locked away in the cold, exposed to the elements, was too much to bear. Jason and Lucy went on with their lives, enjoying their comfortable home and lavish meals, while Mr. Stephen lay in the cage, shivering and starved. Matthew, Mr. Stephen's 12-year-old grandson, was the only one who seemed to care. Matthew often snuck food to his grandfather, his heart breaking as he saw the suffering in the cage. But one day, Lucy caught him. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. When Matthew tried to defend himself, she slapped him across the face, scolding him for caring about that useless old man. Jason was just as indifferent, grabbing Matthew by the collar and throwing him to the ground. The cruelty of his parents shook Matthew to his core, but it also ignited a fire in him. He could no longer stand by and watch his grandfather suffer. Desperate to save his grandfather, Matthew found the courage to act. He managed to sneak into Jason's office one night and found a recording on Jason's phone evidence of his father's cruelty. The video showed Jason mocking his father's imminent death, revealing just how heartless he had become. Matthew sent the video to Mr. Stephen's old friend, Mr. James, and to a few trusted neighbors, and together they devised a plan to get the authorities involved. They knew they couldn't rely on local law enforcement due to Jason's wealth and influence, but they could count on someone with real power, the mayor. With the evidence in hand, they approached the mayor, who acted quickly. The police were dispatched to the house, and Jason and Lucy were arrested. The community was in shock. Neighbors who had once feared Jason's power now saw him for what he truly was, a cruel man who had mistreated his father for years. The truth was finally out, and justice had been served. As Jason and Lucy were taken away in handcuffs, Matthew stood by his grandfather's side, no longer afraid. He had done what needed to be done, and in doing so, he had not only saved his grandfather's life, but had also stood up for what was right. Mr. Stephen, though weak from the abuse, was finally freed from the cage, and with Matthew's help, he began to recover. The once isolated and abandoned man was now surrounded by a community that cared for him. Mr. Stephen's story became a symbol of perseverance and the power of family. Though he had lost everything material, he had gained something far more valuable: respect, loyalty, and love. Matthew had proven that even in the face of overwhelming cruelty, standing up for what is right can bring about change. Mr. Stephen had spent his life building his fortune, working from the ground up to provide a comfortable life for his family. But after the death of his wife, he made the decision to transfer control of his assets to his only son, Jason, in hopes of enjoying his remaining years in peace. What he didn't anticipate was the darkness that would unfold in his own home. With a heavy heart, he handed over the management of his estate, believing that his son would care for him in his old age, surrounded by family and the love he had worked so hard to provide. Little did he know, his world was about to shatter. At first, Jason and his wife, Lucy, appeared supportive. They smiled, pretended to be loving, and promised to care for Mr. Stephen. "You've worked hard all your life. Now, it's time to rest," Lucy said with a fake tenderness that masked the malice brewing beneath the surface. As time passed, however, Mr. Stephen began to notice the subtle shifts in behavior, small but unmistakable signs of betrayal. Jason, who had once been his pride and joy, slowly began to strip away Mr. Stephen's sense of dignity. His once generous monthly allowance was cut down, and even simple pleasures, like going out for coffee with friends, were forbidden. "There's no need for you to carry money around anymore," Jason said coldly, making it clear that his father was no longer valued. The allowances became smaller, and soon Mr. Stephen realized that his son's affection was only conditional. He was no longer the loving father who had built a life for his family, he was a burden. Lucy, once kind and considerate, also began to show her true colors. What started as gentle words of concern morphed into cruel remarks. One afternoon, as Mr. Stephen was reading in the living room, she scolded him for leaving books out. "Can you stop leaving books everywhere? This house isn't a library," she snapped. For the first time in his life, Mr. Stephen felt like an outsider in his own home. The warm haven he had once created now felt like a cold prison. The worst was yet to come. Jason moved his father from his spacious room on the second floor into a small, dark, damp room on the ground floor. "It's more convenient," he claimed, as he cleared out his father's personal belongings. The room had no windows and was barely livable. Jason even hired a new maid, Gracie, to save money. The presence of Gracie, a woman who was strict but kind, made things worse for Mr. Stephen. Gracie, though sympathetic, couldn't act against Jason's wishes, knowing full well the consequences of opposing him. As the days passed, Mr. Stephen's sense of helplessness grew. The house that had once been a symbol of love and success had become a house of isolation and cruelty. One evening, as Mr. Stephen was sitting in the garden, Lucy passed by him with a sneer, telling him to be careful not to fall and break a bone. It was a callous remark that showed just how far she had fallen from her former kindness. But the final blow came when Jason, with a cold expression, locked his father in a metal cage in the backyard, the same cage they had once used for their family dog. This was no longer the home Mr. Stephen had built. It was a nightmare. But amidst the cruelty, there was a glimmer of hope. Matthew, Mr. Stephen's 12-year-old grandson, still cared for him. He would sneak food to his grandfather, offering him comfort in small, quiet moments. Yet, this act of kindness did not go unnoticed. Lucy found out, and in a fit of rage, slapped Matthew across the face. Jason, too, was harsh and cold, telling Matthew to stay away from his grandfather. Matthew was terrified, but his love for his grandfather burned brightly in his heart. One night, after witnessing his grandfather's suffering, Matthew decided he could no longer stand by. He bravely snuck into Jason's office, looking for evidence to expose the cruelty. He found a video on Jason's phone footage of Jason mocking his father, declaring that he would soon die and that no effort was needed to care for him anymore. Matthew immediately sent the video to Mr. Stephen's old friend, Mr. James, and a few trusted neighbors. They devised a plan to confront the horrors within the home, knowing that they couldn't count on the local authorities due to Jason's influence. Matthew reached out to the mayor with the evidence, and soon, the police arrived. The truth could no longer be hidden. Jason and Lucy were arrested, and their cruelty was laid bare for all to see. The community, once afraid of Jason's wealth and power, was now united in their outrage. Neighbors, who had been too scared to act, now stood together, demanding justice. The trial of Jason and Lucy was a spectacle of public condemnation. Matthew, though devastated by what had happened, stood proudly beside his grandfather, knowing that he had done the right thing. In the end, Jason and Lucy were sentenced to prison, and Mr. Stephen, though physically frail, was finally free. But the story didn't end with just a courtroom victory. As Mr. Stephen and Matthew began their new life, they found solace in each other. The town, once full of whispers, now rallied around them, offering support and friendship. The experience had taught them both the value of love and the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the odds. In the months that followed, Matthew flourished. He returned to school, made new friends, and found joy in his life once again. As for Mr. Stephen, he found peace, surrounded by people who cared. He no longer lived in fear, and his pride in his grandson grew every day. Together, they had overcome the darkest of times, proving that love and justice can still prevail, no matter the cruelty faced along the way. Mr. Stephen had spent decades building a legacy, tirelessly working to secure his family's future. His success was well known in the community, and he was revered for his wisdom and generosity. After the death of his beloved wife, he thought his golden years would be filled with peace, enjoying time with his family and watching his grandchildren grow. He trusted his only son, Jason, to manage the family's assets and take care of him in his old age. But what he didn't expect was that his son would use this trust to imprison him in a nightmare of betrayal. It all started innocently enough, with Jason and his wife, Lucy, expressing promises of care and affection. But as soon as the documents were signed, handing over the reins of the family estate, their true intentions began to surface. Jason, with his cold demeanor, started cutting back on Mr. Stephen's allowances and privileges. The money that once flowed freely was reduced, and Mr. Stephen, a man used to comfort and dignity, now found himself struggling to make ends meet. "Dad, there's no need for you to carry cash anymore," Jason said, taking control over every little aspect of his father's life. And as his father's allowance was cut, so too was his independence. The man who had worked tirelessly all his life was now being treated like a burden, and Jason's subtle cruelty began to show. Lucy, once warm and caring, began to change as well. Her demeanor went from sympathetic to callous, and the kind words she once spoke were replaced with sharp, condescending comments. "Can you stop leaving books everywhere? This house isn't a library," she snapped at him one day. Her words cut deeper than she realized. Mr. Stephen, who had once felt proud of the home he built and the family he provided for, now felt like a stranger in his own house. The warmth that used to fill the air had turned to cold indifference. But Jason's manipulation didn't stop there. He moved Mr. Stephen out of his large, comfortable room on the second floor into a tiny, dark room on the ground floor that had previously been a storage space. "This is more convenient," Jason explained, as if that could justify stripping his father of his dignity. The room had no windows and was damp and cold. Jason's actions reflected a deep disregard for the father who had given him everything, and with each passing day, Mr. Stephen's heart grew heavier. Matthew, Mr. Stephen's 12-year-old grandson, was the only one who showed him any kindness. Despite the coldness of his parents, Matthew would sneak in to visit his grandfather, bringing him little comforts and sharing quiet moments of love. But this kindness didn't go unnoticed. Lucy soon discovered Matthew's secret visits and forbade him from seeing his grandfather. "He's just a useless old man who knows nothing but his past," she told Matthew, striking him across the face when he tried to stand up for his grandfather. Jason, standing nearby, didn't intervene. The cruelty was palpable, and it was clear that Jason and Lucy's hearts were consumed by greed and bitterness. One evening, Mr. Stephen asked Jason for money to buy medicine. "What medicine do you need?" Jason replied coldly. "Tell me, and I'll buy it, but don't think you can spend money like before." Jason's treatment of his father had grown worse, and with every word, Mr. Stephen realized just how far his son had fallen. His anger was replaced by a deep sadness. Was this the son he had raised with such care? The tipping point came one night when Jason locked his father in a metal cage in the backyard. It wasn't just a cage, it was the same dog kennel they had once used for the family's pet. Mr. Stephen, frail and weak, was thrown into the cage like an animal, left to shiver in the freezing cold. The sound of the cage door slamming shut echoed through his mind, as if the final remnants of his dignity were stripped away. He was no longer a father, he was just a burden to a son who had turned into a stranger. But even in his lowest moments, Mr. Stephen wasn't completely without hope. His grandson Matthew, though small and terrified, refused to give up. Matthew snuck food to his grandfather, risking punishment from his parents to ensure Mr. Stephen's survival. But his acts of love did not go unnoticed by Lucy, who slapped him and threatened him with even worse punishment. Matthew, despite the pain, knew he couldn't stop. His grandfather's life depended on him. One night, after sneaking into Jason's office, Matthew found the video he was looking for proof of Jason's cruelty. The video showed Jason and Lucy laughing as they spoke about Mr. Stevens' imminent death, mocking him as if he were nothing more than an inconvenience. With trembling hands, Matthew sent the video to Mr. Stevens' old friend, Mr. James, and to a few trusted neighbors. They quickly made a plan. It was time to expose the truth. The community, once afraid of Jason's wealth and influence, now stood united, ready to take action. With the help of the mayor and key allies, the police arrived at Jason's mansion, ready to end the nightmare. Jason and Lucy were arrested, their cruelty laid bare for all to see. The neighbors who had once stayed silent now rallied behind Matthew and Mr. Stephen, providing the support they so desperately needed. The town, once too scared to intervene, had finally found the courage to do what was right. Matthew's bravery, though still a child, had changed everything. His act of courage led to Jason and Lucy's arrest and ensured that no one else would suffer the way Mr. Stephen had. Mr. Stephen, though still frail, began to heal in both body and spirit. The community embraced him, and together, he and Matthew found peace in the knowledge that justice had been served. Matthew, the boy who had once been terrified of his parents, had become a hero. And Mr. Stephen, the father betrayed by his own son, found comfort in the love of a grandson who refused to let him be forgotten. Mr. Stephen, once a proud and respected businessman, had spent decades building an empire, pouring his heart and soul into ensuring that his family would thrive for generations. But after his wife passed, his once promising future turned dark. He had been blessed with a son, Jason, whom he trusted wholeheartedly to take over the management of his estate. Jason was the only child, and Mr. Stephen believed that his family, especially his son, would take care of him in his twilight years. But little did he know, the man he had trusted would become his greatest betrayer. From the moment Jason and his wife Lucy took control of Mr. Stephen's wealth, their attitude shifted. What seemed like a supportive gesture quickly transformed into a disturbing pattern of cruelty and manipulation. At first, Jason's tactics were subtle. The monthly allowance he had promised his father slowly shrank. Mr. Stephen had a small habit of going out for coffee each morning, but Jason soon took that away. "You don't need cash anymore, Dad," he told him coldly. "It's just a waste." The old man, who had worked tirelessly all his life, found his comfort stripped away by the son he had always trusted. But it didn't stop there. Lucy, once sweet and loving, began to show her true colors. What once were warm, caring smiles were now replaced with biting words and dismissive actions. "Can you stop leaving books everywhere? This house isn't a library," she snapped one day after Mr. Stephen left a few books in the living room. The very house that he had built, where he had once felt at home and surrounded by love, now felt like a prison. The cruelty continued to escalate. His spacious, comfortable room on the second floor, where he had once rested and found peace, was replaced by a small, damp room on the ground floor. "This is more convenient," Jason insisted, showing no empathy for the aging father who had given up everything for his family. The cold room, with no windows and little light, felt like a place meant to isolate, not care for. But perhaps the worst betrayal came when Mr. Stephen was locked in a metal cage in the backyard, a once friendly family dog kennel that had been resurrected as a symbol of his son's deep disdain. Mr. Stephen's frail body shivered uncontrollably as he was thrown into the cage, the cold night air biting into his skin. He tried to understand how it had come to this, how the son he had raised with love and devotion had turned into the very person who would now allow him to suffer in isolation. As Mr. Stephen shivered in the cage, the only light in his life came from his 12-year-old grandson, Matthew. The boy, still pure and innocent, refused to believe that his grandfather deserved this treatment. He would sneak food and water to the old man, risking his own safety and defying the cruelty of his parents. Matthew's heart broke every time he saw his grandfather lying there in the cold, weak and helpless. Despite the beatings and threats, Matthew's love for his grandfather drove him to take action. He would not stand by while this injustice unfolded. But Lucy soon caught on to Matthew's defiance. She slapped him across the face and forbade him from seeing his grandfather. The cruelty was unimaginable, but Matthew refused to back down. "Grandpa doesn't deserve this," he whispered, even as he wiped away his tears. But Matthew, just a boy, was powerless against his parents' tyranny. Then, one night, Matthew made a decision that would change everything. He snuck into his father's study and found the evidence he needed, the video that would expose Jason and Lucy's inhumanity. It was proof that the man he had once admired and trusted had taken a dark and monstrous path. Matthew sent the video to a trusted friend of Mr. Stevens, hoping that someone would finally stand up and help. The video showed Jason and Lucy mocking Mr. Steven, laughing about his suffering and planning for his death. It was undeniable proof of their cruel intentions. Armed with this video, the community, once too fearful of Jason's wealth and power, finally began to rally together. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to intervene now found the courage to act. With the help of local authorities and the mayor, they planned to expose Jason and Lucy for what they truly were. The police arrived at the mansion, armed with the video evidence and the support of the community. Jason and Lucy, realizing that their twisted reign of cruelty was finally coming to an end, tried to deny the charges, but it was too late. The video, along with the testimony from Matthew and medical professionals, was enough to convict them. The courtroom erupted in applause as the judge handed down their sentence: 15 years in prison for elder abuse, child abuse, and exploitation. Justice had prevailed. Mr. Steven, despite his frailty, was finally freed from the hell his son had created. He was moved to a hospital where he could begin his recovery. The community that had once turned a blind eye now stepped forward, offering their help and support. Matthew, the brave grandson, had saved his grandfather from a life of suffering, and in doing so, had shown the world that no matter how small you are, standing up for what is right can change everything. The darkness of betrayal in a family can cut deeper than any physical wound. Mr. Steven, once a respected businessman who had devoted his life to building a fortune for his family, found himself in the most heartbreaking situation of his life. After his wife's passing, he decided to pass the reins of his wealth to his only son, Jason, hoping that he could enjoy his later years surrounded by his family and comforted by the thought that his hard work had secured their futures. However, he had no idea that his son, the very person he had trusted the most, would ultimately become the one to betray him in the cruelest way imaginable. At first, Jason and his wife, Lucy, pretended to honor Mr. Stevens' trust. They promised to take care of him, but their smiles were just that, empty gestures. The deterioration started slowly. Jason reduced his father's monthly allowance, even taking away small luxuries that had been part of Mr. Stevens' routine, like going out for coffee with friends. "You don't need cash anymore, Dad," Jason said dismissively, slowly stripping his father of his independence. Then came the more severe actions. His spacious room on the second floor, once a symbol of respect and comfort, was replaced with a dark, damp room on the ground floor. It was small and claustrophobic, a stark contrast to the life Mr. Steven had once known. Lucy, once kind and gentle, became harsh and indifferent. The little things, like snapping at him for leaving books around or commenting on his presence in the house, were nothing more than small acts of cruelty, all meant to chip away at his dignity. But the worst was yet to come. One day, Mr. Steven found himself in the middle of a nightmare that no parent could ever imagine. He was locked in an iron cage in the backyard. The very backyard where, years before, his family had kept a beloved dog. It was as if they had turned him into an animal, no longer deserving of a home or respect. Cold and alone, he lay in that cage, shivering from both the physical and emotional torment. How had things turned so horribly wrong? How could the son he had raised with love and care, the son he had worked tirelessly for, now be the one to treat him like a prisoner in his own home? The brutality of this act was suffocating, and yet Mr. Steven had no choice but to endure it. His only hope was that someone would intervene. That person came in the form of his 12-year-old grandson, Matthew, a boy still innocent, still holding on to his moral compass, despite the cruelty he had witnessed at home. Matthew, who had been forbidden from seeing his grandfather, defied his parents. He would sneak into the yard and bring food to the old man, risking not only his own safety, but also defying the harsh rules of his household. Matthew's small acts of kindness were like a light in Mr. Stevens' darkest days. But it wasn't enough. The suffering continued. Matthew knew he had to do more. The only way to stop this madness, to free his grandfather from the iron cage and the grip of cruelty, was to expose the truth. He sneaked into his father's office and found the video that would prove everything. In it, Jason and Lucy mocked Mr. Stephen's suffering, showing their complete disregard for his well-being. Matthew sent the video to a trusted friend of his grandfather's, hoping that someone with the courage to act would finally step in. And step in they did. With the help of Mr. Stephen's old friends and local authorities, the video was used to build a case against Jason and Lucy. When the police arrived at the mansion, Jason and Lucy were caught off guard. They tried to deny everything, but it was too late. The video, along with the testimony of Matthew and medical professionals, provided undeniable evidence of the abuse Mr. Stephen had suffered. Jason and Lucy were arrested and charged with elder abuse, child abuse, and exploitation. The courtroom erupted in applause as the guilty verdict was handed down, and Jason and Lucy were sentenced to prison. For Mr. Stephen, the victory was bittersweet. He had been freed from his son's cruelty, but the emotional scars would never fully heal. What did it mean for him to be a father, to raise a son, only to have that son betray him in such a way? The victory didn't undo the years of suffering. However, Matthew's bravery, his refusal to stand by and let his grandfather die in that cage, had made all the difference. It was Matthew's courage that had brought justice, that had saved his grandfather, and it was Matthew who would now help Mr. Stephen rebuild his life. The story of Mr. Stephen and Matthew is a testament to the power of love and courage. No matter how cruel life may seem, standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you, can bring about the greatest victories. Matthew may have been just a boy, but he proved that even the smallest among us can change the course of history with the strength of their heart. It's a reminder that love, even in the face of unimaginable betrayal, can light the way toward justice. The heart-wrenching reality of elder abuse within a family is an unimaginable betrayal that shakes the very foundation of love and trust. Mr. Stephen, once a thriving businessman who had worked tirelessly for decades to build a secure life for his family, found himself in the most horrific position of his life, betrayed by the very son he had raised and trusted. After his wife's passing, Mr. Stephen thought he could finally enjoy his later years in peace, surrounded by his family, particularly his only son, Jason. The idea of handing over his wealth to Jason, who was now in charge of managing the family fortune, filled him with hope that his hard work would ensure comfort in his old age. But what Mr. Stephen didn't know was that his trust would be broken in the cruelest possible way. At first, Jason and his wife, Lucy, put on a facade of caring, promising to take good care of Mr. Stephen. But over time, their true nature began to surface, and Mr. Stephen started to realize the grim reality. Jason cut his father's monthly allowance, claiming that there was no need for Mr. Stephen to carry cash around anymore. What started as small changes soon escalated into a complete disregard for his well-being. Jason removed Mr. Stephen from his spacious, comfortable room, forcing him to move into a small dark room on the ground floor, a place that felt more like a prison than a home. The lack of compassion from Jason and Lucy was palpable, their cruel words and actions snapping at him for small things, dismissing his needs, and cutting off his access to basic comforts left Mr. Stephen feeling like a stranger in his own home. But the abuse didn't stop there. Jason, feeling increasingly entitled to control every aspect of his father's life, decided to take the next shocking step. He locked Mr. Stephen in a cold iron cage in the backyard, a place where he had once kept their family dog. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. Mr. Stephen had given everything for his family, and now he found himself treated like an animal, isolated and vulnerable. The emotional torment of being betrayed by the person he loved and trusted most was far worse than the physical cold he endured in the cage. His heart ached as he thought of all the years he had sacrificed to build a life for them, only to be discarded when he could no longer contribute. And yet, he held on to a faint hope that somehow things would change, that someone would intervene, that the truth would come to light. That intervention came in the form of his young grandson, Matthew. Despite being forbidden by his parents, Matthew couldn't stand to watch his grandfather suffer. The 12-year-old boy, innocent yet wise beyond his years, secretly snuck food to Mr. Stephen in the dead of night. Each moment he spent with his grandfather in the cage was a small act of defiance, a refusal to accept the injustice being done. Matthew, in his own quiet way, tried to fight for the dignity of the man who had once cared for him. But even Matthew knew that these small acts of kindness were not enough. The cage, the cold, the hunger, and the relentless abuse would eventually take their toll on Mr. Stephen. There had to be a way to expose Jason and Lucy for what they had done. Matthew's opportunity came when he discovered that Jason had been recording videos of his cruel actions. Armed with undeniable proof, Matthew sent the video to a family friend, a trusted ally who would not stand idly by. The video, showing Jason and Lucy mocking Mr. Stephen's suffering, was the evidence that would bring them to justice. The police, aided by Mr. Stephen's old friends, moved swiftly, and before Jason and Lucy knew it, the authorities were at their door. Their world, built on lies and cruelty, came crashing down as they were arrested and charged with elder abuse, child abuse, and exploitation. The courtrooms were filled with applause as the guilty verdict was read, and Jason and Lucy were sentenced to prison. The victory was bittersweet for Mr. Stephen. He was finally free from his son's grip, but the emotional scars were not so easily healed. He had been betrayed in the most intimate and profound way by the person he had loved and trusted the most. His life, which had once been filled with ambition, family, and success, was now scarred by the actions of his own flesh and blood. And yet, amid the pain and betrayal, there was hope. Matthew's bravery, his refusal to back down, had saved Mr. Stephen's life. It was a small, shining light in the darkness. In the end, the boy's courage had brought justice to his grandfather and had proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, standing up for what's right could change the course of history. Matthew's journey was a testament to the power of love, courage, and justice. Despite the horrors he had witnessed and endured, he remained a beacon of hope for Mr. Stephen, proving that even the smallest among us can make the biggest difference when we stand up for what's right. And for Mr. Stephen, it was a reminder that no matter how much wealth or power one has, the true value of life lies in the love and loyalty we give to those around us. As he and Matthew began to rebuild their lives, it was clear that the future, though still uncertain, would be filled with the warmth of love, justice, and a new beginning. In the quiet, seemingly peaceful life of Mr. Stephen, a once respected businessman, a nightmare of betrayal unfolded within the very home he had worked so hard to provide. After the passing of his wife, he hoped for nothing more than to live out his remaining years surrounded by his son Jason and his grandchildren, enjoying the fruits of his lifelong labor. But the cruel actions of his son shattered that dream. Jason, once a trusted child, had become the architect of his father's misery, taking advantage of his elderly father's frailty for his own selfish desires. Mr. Stephen had worked tirelessly throughout his life, building a legacy that should have been a source of pride, yet what awaited him in his later years was cruelty and abandonment. At first, Jason and his wife, Lucy, pretended to be loving caretakers, promising to provide for Mr. Stephen's needs. However, it soon became apparent that their promises were empty. Jason, motivated by greed and a desire for control, began to limit his father's resources, reducing his monthly allowance and stripping him of his dignity. The once wealthy businessman was now forced to live in a cramped, dark room on the ground floor of his own house, a far cry from the life he had worked so hard to build. His son, the person he trusted the most, no longer saw him as a father, but as an inconvenience. But the true horror began when Jason, with the help of his wife, decided to lock Mr. Stephen in an iron cage in the backyard, an appalling act that symbolized their utter disregard for him. The cage, a place once used for the family dog, now became the prison that Mr. Stephen was sentenced to, left out in the cold to shiver and waste away. The betrayal Mr. Stephen felt in that moment was unimaginable. How could his own flesh and blood, the son he had trusted and worked for, subject him to such degradation? The isolation was crushing. With each passing day, he could feel his strength slipping away as he clung to the faint hope that someone would come to his aid. It was his young grandson, Matthew, who became the unexpected hero in this story of horror. Despite being forbidden to visit his grandfather, Matthew's love and concern for Mr. Stephen never wavered. In secret, he would slip food to his grandfather, showing small acts of compassion in an attempt to mitigate the cruelty his parents imposed. But even a child understood that these small gestures were not enough. Matthew knew he had to act, that his grandfather's life was slipping away, and the time to intervene was running out. With no one else willing to help, Matthew made the courageous decision to take matters into his own hands. Matthew's resourcefulness became the turning point in this tale of abuse. He discovered that Jason had secretly recorded videos boasting of the cruelty he and Lucy were inflicting on Mr. Stephen. Armed with undeniable proof, Matthew bravely sent the video to a family friend who could help. The evidence was damning, and it didn't take long for the police to intervene. The once silent neighbors, who had watched the abuse unfold in fear, finally had the courage to speak up. Jason and Lucy were arrested, their house of lies and manipulation crumbling around them. The trial that followed was a moment of reckoning for Jason and Lucy. Their cruel actions were exposed to the world, and they faced the consequences of their betrayal. The courtroom, which had once been silent in the face of Mr. Stephen's suffering, erupted in applause as justice was finally served. Jason and Lucy were sentenced to prison, and for the first time in a long while, Mr. Stephen felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. His son, once a source of pride, was now the villain in this tragic story. Yet, the true victory lay in the bond between Mr. Stephen and Matthew. Despite the pain and betrayal, Mr. Stephen found solace in the love and loyalty his grandson showed him. Together, they began to rebuild their lives, surrounded by a community that, while late in acting, embraced them with open arms. The neighbors, who had once looked the other way, now rallied around Mr. Stephen and Matthew, helping them settle into a new life. This was a life filled with love, healing, and hope, a stark contrast to the darkness that had once consumed their home. Matthew, who had once been a frightened boy, now stood as a symbol of courage, justice, and resilience. His actions proved that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the love for family and the pursuit of what's right can lead to the most profound victories. For Mr. Stephen, the pain of the past would always linger, but he knew he would never be alone again. With his grandson by his side, he had found a new beginning, a life defined not by betrayal, but by the strength of family, justice, and an unbreakable bond of love. In the quiet town, where Mr. Stephen once commanded respect as a wealthy and successful businessman, a dark chapter of betrayal was unfolding within his own home. Having worked tirelessly throughout his life, Mr. Stephen had hoped for a peaceful and fulfilling retirement, surrounded by his family. When his beloved wife passed away, he passed on the responsibilities of managing the family fortune to his only son, Jason, trusting that his son would care for him in his later years. Little did Mr. Stephen know, the very son he had devoted his life to raising would soon become the source of his suffering and despair. At first, Jason and his wife, Lucy, played the part of the dutiful caretakers, vowing to care for Mr. Stephen in his old age. However, their promises quickly faded as their true intentions emerged. Jason, driven by greed and a thirst for control, began to slowly strip away his father's financial security, reducing his monthly allowance and cutting off his access to basic necessities. Jason justified his actions with empty words of saving money, but the reality was much darker. What was once a comfortable, loving home for Mr. Stephen soon became a prison, where he was pushed aside and disregarded by the very family he had worked so hard to provide for. The heart-wrenching cruelty escalated when Jason, with Lucy's approval, moved Mr. Stephen into a small, dark room in the house that was once used as a storage space. The room had no windows, no warmth, and no light. It was a stark contrast to the spacious, sunlit room he had once enjoyed. But it wasn't just the living conditions that changed. Mr. Stephen, who had once been treated with the utmost respect, now found himself abandoned and isolated. Jason and Lucy, though still playing the role of caretakers on the surface, revealed their true disdain for the elderly man. It wasn't long before their cruelty knew no bounds. The breaking point came when Jason and Lucy decided to lock Mr. Stephen in an iron cage in the backyard, a cold metal cage that once housed a dog, now transformed into a symbol of his father's torment. The cage, cold and unforgiving, stood in the backyard as a constant reminder to Mr. Stephen of his worthlessness in their eyes. The situation went unnoticed by many, with Jason's wealth and influence allowing him to cover up his actions. But one person refused to stay silent: Matthew, Mr. Stephen's 12-year-old grandson. Despite the risks, Matthew couldn't ignore the suffering of his beloved grandfather. Matthew's love and concern for his grandfather led him to secretly feed him, sneaking food into the cage to offer a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. But Matthew knew that a piece of bread and water weren't enough to save Mr. Stephen. Something bigger had to be done. Matthew's courage grew as he realized the severity of the situation. With no one else willing to help, Matthew made a bold decision to take matters into his own hands. He secretly recorded Jason's voice in the backyard, where Jason had been heard mocking his father's suffering. Matthew knew the video would be the proof needed to expose Jason's cruelty to the world. In an act of bravery, Matthew sent the video to a trusted family friend, Mr. James, who would help him reveal the truth. The video sent shockwaves through the town, and within hours, the police were involved. Jason and Lucy's abuse could no longer be ignored. The truth came crashing down on Jason and Lucy during the police investigation. When the authorities arrived at the house, it was clear that justice was finally going to be served. Neighbors, who had once been too fearful to speak out, finally found their courage to help. The once respected businessman Jason had become a villain, his family's wealth and power unable to protect him from the consequences of his actions. Jason and Lucy were arrested, their lives unraveling before their eyes as they were dragged away in handcuffs. For Mr. Stephen, the relief of knowing that his son would face justice was a bittersweet victory, one that came far too late to restore the years of suffering he had endured. But the true victory lay in the bond between Mr. Stephen and Matthew. Despite the betrayal, despite the heartache, Mr. Stephen found solace in his grandson's unwavering love. Matthew's bravery had given Mr. Stephen the strength to hold on, and together they began to rebuild their lives, one day at a time. The once oppressive mansion now felt like a place of hope. The neighbors, who had once turned a blind eye, now rallied around Mr. Stephen and Matthew, helping them start anew. The healing had begun, and in time, Mr. Stephen found peace not in his past wealth, but in the love of his grandson, the love that had never wavered. Jason and Lucy, on the other hand, were left to face the harsh consequences of their actions. In prison, Jason's once confident demeanor had shattered, replaced by a man who had lost everything. No longer protected by his wealth and power, Jason was forced to confront the reality of what he had done. For Lucy, the life she once knew had vanished, and she was now just another criminal facing a lifetime of consequences. They had underestimated the power of love and justice, and in the end, it was Matthew's courage that had brought about their downfall. Through Matthew's actions, we are reminded that standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can change the course of a life. For Mr. Stephen, it was not wealth or power that brought him peace. It was the love of his grandson and the justice that followed. Together, they found a new beginning, one built on the foundations of family, love, and the unwavering belief that justice always prevails. This paragraph highlights the emotional highs and lows of the story, engaging the reader with themes of betrayal, courage, and the triumph of love and justice. It's designed to resonate deeply with an American audience, focusing on universal themes of family, loyalty, and the power of doing what's right. The story of Mr. Stephen and his grandson, Matthew, carries profound lessons that resonate with the values of resilience, compassion, and the importance of standing up for what's right. It reminds us that, no matter the circumstances, the power of love and family can overcome the deepest of betrayals. In life, we may face moments of hardship, even from those we trust the most, but it is our ability to remain true to our values and protect those we love that defines our strength. The story also teaches us the significance of not turning a blind eye to injustice, especially when it involves the vulnerable. Just like Matthew, who refused to give up on his grandfather, we must never underestimate the impact one person can have when they act with courage and integrity. Life may present challenges that seem insurmountable, but it is in these moments that our character is shaped. The story of Mr. Stephen's suffering and ultimate redemption speaks to the importance of never losing hope, even in the face of cruelty, and to the healing power of standing together as a family. For the elderly, this story is a gentle reminder that no matter how difficult the road may seem, kindness, compassion, and unwavering love can pave the way for a brighter, more fulfilling future. Thank you for watching. If you were touched by this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to Stories TH for more content like this. Your support helps us continue raising awareness about important issues like elder abuse. Stay tuned for more heart-stirring stories.